Love Tales by Mars Quad.
Have you ever heard bad advice that actually worked? Sometimes the toxic thing everyone says not to do is exactly what forces the truth to come out. Today, on Love Tales, I want to share her story. A woman who did everything right until doing the wrong thing saved her relationship. Hey family, Mars Quad here. Welcome to another soul-healing episode of Love Tales. Let's dive right in. For about a year, things had just been off for her. It wasn't one big thing, but 1,000 tiny paper cuts. The energy in their apartment was heavy, like trying to walk through thick mud.
Love Tales by Mars Quad.
Conversations felt like navigating a minefield, where one wrong step could trigger days of tense silence. Her partner was distant, not in a way that screamed, "I'm unhappy," but in a way that was much more confusing. It was this low-grade, constant withdrawal, one-word answers, vague replies about plans, a general lack of enthusiasm for, well, her. So she did what any dedicated partner would do. She doubled down on all the healthy advice. First up was, communicate everything. So she did. She'd say things like, "I feel disconnected from you when you're on your phone while I'm talking," or, "I feel lonely when we don't spend quality time together." But instead of bringing them closer, this constant narration of her feelings started to sound like nagging even to her own ears. The talks were draining, circular, and went absolutely nowhere. It felt less like connecting and more like a constant performance review where he was always failing. Next, she tried to always be the bigger person. This one is so sneaky because it sounds so noble, right? It meant she was always the first one to apologize, even when she knew she wasn't wrong, just to keep the peace. She was the one letting things go, swallowing her own frustration for the sake of harmony. But it didn't create harmony. It created resentment. A deep simmering resentment that she was the only one tending to the emotional garden of their relationship. And of course, the classic, schedule date nights. So she did. She made the reservations, bought the tickets, planned these elaborate evenings to try and recapture the magic. But you can't schedule magic? She'd be sitting across the table at some fancy restaurant, trying to force a connection that just wasn't there, and feeling more alone than if she had just stayed home. She started to see that this kind of advice is meant for two people who are rowing in the same direction. She was the only one with an oar in the water. The problem with all this healthy advice was that it assumed they both had the same good intentions. She was playing a game of tennis, hitting these perfect practice serves, and her partner hadn't even picked up his racket. She hit her low point on a Tuesday night. She'd made his favorite dinner, and he barely looked up from his phone. She asked about his day and got a grunt in response. She felt that familiar wave of desperation wash over her. What more can I do? How do I fix this? Later that night, she couldn't sleep. She was just scrolling, falling down an internet rabbit hole of articles and forums about relationship problems. And then she saw it. It wasn't from a licensed therapist or a famous coach. It was a comment, buried deep in some forum, from someone who sounded cynical and just. Done. The advice was simple, and to her healthy advice brain, totally appalling. It said, "Stop trying, just mirror their energy. That's it. If they give you one-word answers, you give them one-word answers. If they put in low effort, you match it. If they pull away, you don't chase. You just match them." Her first thought was, that's horrible. That's playing games. It's petty. It's the opposite of everything she'd been trying to do. Good relationships are about giving, about being the bigger person, about putting in the work. But then a second thought cut through all that. What do I have to lose? Her current strategy was a spectacular failure. Her 100% effort was getting her a 0% return. So, with nothing left to lose, she decided to try it. She decided to get a little toxic. The next day, the experiment began. It felt so unnatural, like trying to write with her left hand. When her partner sent her a one-word text, her thumbs were itching to write a whole paragraph back. To ask questions. To engage. Instead, she just wrote, "Okay." And that was it. Later that evening, he casually mentioned he was going out with friends. Normally, that would be her cue to ask who, where, what time he'd be home to show she's interested. Instead, she just nodded and said, "Have fun." She didn't offer to wait up or ask him to text her. She just went back to her book. The first few days were silent. Eerily silent. The ball was in his court, and it just sat there. "I'm not gonna let" was painful for her. She felt that constant urge to rush in and fix the silence, to fill the void with her effort and her energy. But she held back. She was just mirroring. If the energy he was giving was silence, then silence is what he got back. And then, something fascinating happened. On day 4, he came home from work, and instead of the usual quiet, he looked at her with something unreadable in his eyes and said, "You've been quiet lately." She just looked at him and said, "Oh?" He pushed. "Yeah, I don't know. You just seem different." And this is where the toxic advice showed her what was really going on. It exposed a manipulation tactic she had been completely blind to. His frustration wasn't because he missed her bubbly personality. He was frustrated because his system, his routine, had broken down. The manipulation was this subtle, maybe even unconscious, form of control where her overfunctioning allowed him to underfunction. He had gotten so used to her being the engine of the relationship, the planner, the talker, the emotional caretaker, that he never had to add any fuel. Her constant effort meant he could just coast. He could disappear into his phone, his work, his own world, feeling totally secure that she'd always be there, working overtime to bridge whatever gap he created. Her mirroring wasn't an attack, it was a removal. She just took her energy out of the equation. By matching his low effort, she wasn't being petty. She was holding up a mirror to his own behavior. And he did not like what he saw. His discomfort wasn't her cue to rush back in and fix things. It was a sign that the imbalance was finally being felt on his end, not just hers. That conversation was the first of many, and they were hard. He accused her of playing games, of being cold. But for the first time, she had a concrete response. She said, "I'm not being cold. I've just stopped trying to force a connection that isn't there. I'm matching the energy I'm getting. Does it feel bad? Because this is how I've felt for the last year." That was a gut punch for both of them. But it was honest. For the first time, they weren't talking about her feelings, which he could always write off as her being too sensitive or needy. They were talking about his actions, reflected right back at him. He couldn't deny the one-word texts or the cancelled plans because she had just shown them to him. This was her big aha moment. She realized that relationship advice isn't one size fits all. All that healthy advice she'd been following, it's for relationships where both people are already on the same team. It assumes you both have a baseline of respect and effort. They didn't have that. Trying to use that advice on their situation was like putting a band-aid on a broken bone. The toxic advice wasn't a long-term plan. It was a diagnostic tool, a stress test that showed them the truth of their dynamic. It forced them to face the real issue, a massive lack of balance and mutual effort. And from that raw, painful place, they could actually start to rebuild. Not with cheesy quotes and empty gestures, but on the rocky, uneven, but very real ground of truth. Now, I want to be crystal clear. I'm not telling you to stop playing toxic games in your relationship. Please don't. The lesson here isn't to be manipulative. The real lesson is to be a smarter consumer of advice and a better student of your own relationship. That toxic advice worked for her because it was, in its own weird way, just her setting a boundary. It was her way of saying, I will not pour my energy into a black hole anymore. It forced her to pay attention and stop running on autopilot. Think of relationship advice like a prescription. You wouldn't take strong medication without a proper diagnosis, so why apply relationship advice without first understanding the unique dynamic between you and your partner? If your relationship is built on mutual respect, then yes, communicate everything is amazing advice. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is just stop. Get quiet. Watch. Match their energy for a day or two and see what happens. Do they notice? Do they step up? Or do they get angry that you've stopped doing all the work? The answer will tell you everything you need to know. This was her experience, and it completely changed how she looks at relationships. I'm really curious to hear from you all. Have you ever gotten a piece of bad or unconventional advice that actually worked? Or what's the most common piece of healthy advice that you found to be totally useless in your own life? Let me know in the comments below. I promise I read them all. In the end, you can't force a relationship to be healthy. You can't fix a deep problem with surface-level tips. The real work on a relationship doesn't start when you try harder. It starts when you finally get quiet enough to see what's really going on. The goal isn't to follow a bunch of rules from a book, but to build a connection that's honest and balanced. It's about having the courage to put the rule book down and just listen to what the energy between you is actually saying. And sometimes you need a little bad advice to finally hear it. Thank you for watching Love Tales by Mars Squad. Stay healing, stay loving, and see you in the next episode.
Love Tales by Mars Squad.
I'm Mars Squad.